All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining. And, a little bit of pressure on us when you say it's the last panel of the day, but we want to make it the fun panel of the day. And remember, the incentive after this is wrap up and drinks, right? So, welcome to the Art and Science of Cross-Border Business Development and Licensing. I think the panel before us kind of did a really nice segue and setup into this, which was more about cross-border investments. Just to introduce myself really quickly, and then I'll introduce my panelists as well. My name is Ajay Nair. I work for the Mullings Group. I actually have a career of about split U.S. with large medical device firms as well as Asia Pacific for the last 14. So my entire career has been cross-border business development. And I'm really excited because we have a fantastic mix of panelists, very esteemed, very great background, especially in what we're talking about. So, Eliane, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Eliane Schutte. I'm the CEO of Xeltis. And Xeltis is a Dutch company, and we're developing transformative vascular devices that have the ability to transform into your own healthy tissue and overcoming a lot of problems. And the core product, the flagship program that we're currently in a pre-commercial phase is a dialysis vascular access conduit. So for patients that are facing a severe disease, end-stage kidney disease.
Thank you. Pieter?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Pieter Wijffels. I am a partner at NLC, and NLC is a venture builder. And we are also based in the Netherlands. Yep. We essentially license IP, build companies around it, grow them and sell them to the strategics. We built 20 companies last year. In total, we've built 150 companies. We license all over the world. We build all over the world. We license in spot A and then build in spot B, so we have a lot of experience, doing the stuff we're talking about today. I also have lived in China for 6 years and in the US for 4 years, so I'm also a bit of a cross-border person myself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Jeff Sirek. I'm the CEO of PRIA Healthcare. I live in Boston, which is cross-border from here, so we can talk about that, the reverse kind. But we are a reimbursement services company. We provide reimbursement services from concept to commercialization. We worked with hundreds of companies in the past to support this type of dynamic. I know reimbursement is a difficult subject to talk about, but a very important one today, and I can't wait to dig into that deeper here during this session.
All right. Dr. Kapasi?
Hi, I'm Dr. Sabine Kapasi. I'm a gynec surgeon. In my earlier career, I worked with WHO and the UN. With WHO, I was the head of digital health for ASEAN and Eastern Europe. And otherwise, at the UN, I was the global strategy head for Audio and Emergency Response. Now I run Enira Private Limited, which is actually an insurance plus GTM service for India, Asia neighborhood. So we help companies who want to look at not just India and Asia as a market, which is 2/3 of the world population today, but also look at Middle East and the global South from a different angle to look at business and development in this region.
Thank you. As you can see, a really interesting mix of background and experience. Dr. Kapasi, since you flew in today, I'm going to maybe put you on the hot seat and kick you off. So listen, the first question really is about just business development and our approach to it, right? You've got kind of a multi-hat perspective. What is kind of your approach and your ethos that you use to kind of approach business development, especially when you look at global, cross-border?
So first and foremost, we are looking at multiple geographies, right? Today also we have representation from several different countries, but largely when we look at any new geography, first thing is the need assessment part of it. I think technologies need a level of adoption and understanding of a new geography. That's very, very important. So I don't really believe in the term, building for global. I think you need to build for local, but then you need to apply it from a need-to-need basis. That is very, very important because every large geography has its own regulatory approaches. So whenever we start, it starts with need. Then you look at, of course, regulations because we are talking about med technology. Many other technologies do not have as much regulatory burden as medical technology does because of the onus of what we deliver in terms of outcomes. But I think that is the hat that we all wear, and that's the responsibility that we bear. So The regulatory approach is the second one, to look at the lay of the land and the best possible regulatory approaches to it. And then I think partnerships is the most important thing. Most people don't understand that. So you make revenues mostly through partnerships, right, to begin with. Then you go to market with other things. But those partnerships are very different and look very different in different geographies. So understanding that is the third most important wing. So these are the three ways that we look at it when we look at entry into new markets.
Jeff, over to you. The science of business development that you use.
Well, I mean, business development is all about targeting, right? And targeting the right time, because our time is important for our company, but it's important for others as well on that side of it. And I think from a business development standpoint, what partners make sense for them and what partners make sense for you. And understanding that concept is really important, because I think sometimes we want to force that business development because it's good for us. But if it's not good for our partners, it's not going to be a synergistic relationship. We're not going to grow together on that side of it. And you can find that out and realize that through your conversations with the people that you're with. It's just about understanding that and then widening that network of the people that really fit well for you. Again, that it's a fit for them as well.
Yeah. Pieter, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be boring and repetitive. Not sure that's a good idea just before drinks, but yeah, so we are all in what is fundamentally a global industry, right? There's no health tech or medtech that is, or very few medtech is confined to a certain geography. We're also in Europe, so 27 countries in the European Union alone, if I didn't lose count. So, and jumping across borders is super hard for many different reasons, reimbursement, maybe the doctors have a different training. Maybe there's a local champion, or I mean there can be many reasons, and then you want to go to the US because that's where the big money is. So no single player in this industry can do this alone. So the reason I lived abroad was because of Philips. I worked for Philips. Even companies of that size, or there's even companies 10 times that size. Nobody can do it alone anymore. So the only way to do business development is by creating an ecosystem. We have about 110 active ventures. We have about 80 staff, but the work we do is together with thousands of people that are involved in some way or another. So the only way to do it is to collaborate.
Yeah, thank you. Eliane, maybe a slight twist on this to break repetitiveness, right? But obviously, as the CEO of Xeltis, what was your approach as you came in as CEO and started to look at the landscape in terms of cross-border? I know licensing is something we've discussed, but how did you sort of approach that?
Well, I mean, honestly, we were at the phase in a company where I was not really thinking about already transatlantic type of commercial deals. To be very frank, we were at the situation in a company where we were thinking about financing the company and finding some creative way of how to finance the company. And this was Corona times when I had to finance the company. And one of the things you can look at traditional type of ways of funding the companies and finding your lead investor, and we all know how that works. But when it was Corona times, and we were also just changing our strategy from the valve proposition more towards the vascular proposition, you're still a little bit in a more, let's say, challenging phase of the company that you have to fundraise. And one of the things that I've looked at in the cardiovascular space at that moment in time, there was a lot of deal flow going on from strategics that were interested in very early and great innovations in Europe from China. And what I've done is then explore that route. Would it be possible to get somebody in as a lead investor, at the same time bringing in, non-dilutive, if possible, and also, is it not hampering your deal flow in the future? And obviously, it's all true, right? Eventually, we can't conquer the world all ourselves. You need partners, and for sure, China is super difficult. But what we did do is have serious conversations with banks and the like to see, is this going to damage the deal flow in the future? Is this going to make us look less attractive, or is it actually going to be more beneficial to us? So, and honestly, I think to us it turned out to be beneficial, because even strategics in the space, in the cardiovascular space, know that China is a very difficult market. So this is how we approached it. Both a little bit, we need a lead, and we need to be more creative in finding this lead, and also finding some non-dilutive money. So that was the reason.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
I'd like to come back to that in a bit, but you triggered something which I'd love to talk about a little bit more, and we hear a lot in the early emerging medtech space, which is how early is early, right? Maybe those, you know, Pieter, yourself, and Dr. Kapasi with the portfolio lenses, what have you seen good examples, or how early is early? When should companies be thinking about sort of this transatlantic, cross-global perspective? Maybe I'll start with you, Pieter, and then Dr. Kapasi.
Yeah, I mean, off the bat, you don't ever want to start a medtech company that doesn't have legs globally. So I think, I mean, everybody here has probably already found it. Maybe it may be too late, but you want to think through that type of stuff up front. I think it is very wise to, after that, get back in your shell for a little bit, to develop in a local ecosystem. Especially in Europe, there's a lot of attempts by governments to support innovation. I think you mentioned non-dilutive. That happens in every geography in Europe. There are government programs, for example, to make it attractive for angels to invest. So you can crawl back into your shell, really understand, you know, what it takes, because we're deep in the valley of death here. So you need focus. But then, at some point, no strategic will be interested in collaborating with you unless you've proven that you can also scale this to other geographies. Again, we come back to, you know, the reimbursement could be different, the training of the doctor could be different. So you're going to have to get out of your shell at some point. And this is probably in the clinical stage. You can do clinical in multiple geographies. And what I've noticed, I don't know if there are any strategics in the room, but they really start becoming interested once you actually enter into another market, so into another regulatory geography. Usually for European ventures, that would be FDA, so the US. And when they start seeing their sales guys coming back and they've noticed you, and like, oh my God, that doctor is now using this startup solution or scale-up solution. It's very interesting. I'd love to sell that. That's when they really start taking notice. And then you're pretty far advanced. Yeah, so I think, you know, in summary, take your time, but not too much to grow in your own little shell. And once you get to the clinical stage, that's, I think, when you want to start going international.
Yeah, and I think it's part about like choosing the right areas based upon your technology as well, correct?
Yep. Very much.
Different countries have different needs and how you would present that target, correct?
It's hard to give a one-size-fits-all answer. It can be very different. I think your field is, again, very different from digital medtech or biotech, again, very different. So you're very right. It's
I mean, the need, what are you really trying to solve? Answering your question on that, I think that is what defines the geography you start with and where do you want to go. If the need is large enough in your primary geography, then start to go all the way till commercial there. I mean, at the end of the day, I come from geographies which are fiscally conservative, highly fiscally conservative and extremely competitive. And that is an interesting approach to it as well, because that makes you take the same dollars a long, long way. And going to the market today, that is a very, very attractive trait as well. So the scope of the need is very important, I think, and what you said, I reflect that completely. And along with that, entering new markets is very much a possibility at any stage. But again, it depends on what is your goal as a company. What are you looking at? Are you looking at commercialization as your first bit? Are you looking at validation? Are you looking at a licensing route out? Are you looking at strategic partnerships as your route out or growth? So as a company, what's your goal is what will determine your strategy into any new market for you, because that has everything, resources, cost, and a lot of time and efforts involved to it. So these are the factors that have to come into picture before you define that.
And some markets are easier than others. There's a registration process and a process there to get your product approved, and that can take months, it can take years, it can take multiples of years, right, as you think about that. And we're smiling because we've all lived through this before, so we understand that.
Right.
So choose well based upon your technology.
So I'll move it a little bit earlier, or you may argue it's not earlier. IP, right? In your experience, maybe we'll start with you, Eliane. When do you start looking at, and how much do you start looking at IP across key markets that you're sort of wanting to enter?
Well, that I believe very strongly, very early. And this is, I think, what our company has done really well. We've looked at Japan, China, and we still are, right? When we're filing patents, we do this very cleverly. And then at a certain moment, we could leverage, right? We could leverage the license to IP in China because we simply had IP in China. If you're not, I mean, there's always, a cost to it. But you regret afterwards, right? Because ultimately they can still copy what you do. So for us, it was very important to do this early on. Yeah.
I lived in China for a long time, so I hear a lot of our CEOs say, "Listen, I don't want to go to China because they'll steal my ID." Well, they may. That's true. Yeah. However, if you don't go, you don't have any business anyway. So the net difference is zero. And they don't generally export IP infringing products. So I completely agree that IP is super important, but whenever people say, I don't want to go to China because of copy concerns, I disagree.
I agree, and I've commercialized many products in China. I haven't had a lot of IP issues, but it does take a long time to get it through the entire process between CE, and you've got to find the right channels there, right? The distribution channels become important on the commercialization side, for sure.
So in China, your channel is your protection.
That's right.
And generally that is because these are people with very strong government ties, and they will make sure that the infringement stays under control.
And that is a crucial point, because that, in fact, for us also, in order to find the Chinese money and the right partner, this is crucial. Find the right one that is really credible, that has the strong ties, because then it will protect itself.
They are your brand, right?
They are your brand, and they will protect from others to enter, right? This is the best way how you can defend that. So, and there's lots of companies out there that are interested in technology. You have to pick the right one that's credible enough and knows what they're up against.
Yeah, I think that protectability of IP is the key factor. IP is very, very important. Registration of IP is very, very important. But more important than that is being able to protect in a particular market, as you quite rightly said. That in China, your channel partners are the ones who are your mechanism of defense towards protection of your IP. But you can look at other market. You can look at the Middle Eastern market. You can look at India and neighborhood market, or SEA as a separate market altogether. I mean, SEA and India plus neighborhood, I believe, are very, very exciting. So is the Latin market. So, I mean, of course, China is an interesting problem to solve, but there are other markets that you can look at where you have a little better defensibility than others.
And I think people have to realize, I mean, amongst our experiences as well, people have to realize that there used to be a time where regulatory in Asian countries was not as well structured. 10, 15 years ago, that's improved a lot. IP has come a long way in terms of protectability. But I agree, there's always this sort of, this vibe of, I'm not going to enter that country because I'm not really sure how to protect it. Similarly, I'd love to talk about licensing, right? It creates a little stir in people. Maybe start with you, Eliane, because I know we specifically talked about it. If you're able to talk about it, how did you sort of structure that for yourself, and how did you sort of come about that position in your setup?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it was honestly quite a complex process, because it started off with a far too broad type of scope, right? This is where I learned first. I mean, if it's too broad, you really don't really understand, well, where is really the interest, where they're going to drive the product to China first. So, and it was already said by the rest of the panelists, you need to have a common ground. Where is your interest? Does it match the one that is getting the license from you? So ultimately, in that learning exercise where it went like this, we narrowed to an indication where we felt, okay, this is it. But we also looked at what does it really take to get it to value on the Chinese end, but also bringing value on our end. So, and we're not trying to do a lot of additional effort that is distracting us from doing our core business. So eventually, this took us quite a number of months. And it looks from, the deal went from this to this. So you can think, okay, it went smaller and smaller. But in fact, the deal got simpler and simpler. And because it got so simple, you get like, okay, 3 milestones very black-white, very clear, in our control, I think the benefit was much better because you get in control, you know what you're up against. It's already complex to talk to Chinese strategics, even though the ones that we had on the phone were well-spoken, their English was perfect. They know what they're doing, very much know what they're doing, but also they sometimes, throw words in, well, for the NMPA, we need this, we need that, and before you know, you're sort of in the limbo land of stuff that you don't know. Yeah, right. So you have to be careful that you're not getting into that type of
right. And I
situation.
think every area is different. EMEA is different than China, and China is different than Australia, and Australia is different than South America, right? All have different rules, different partners, and different regulations you need to be aware of when you're focusing on these areas, obviously.
So I have a contrary opinion. Let's wake people up.
Perfect. Let's go.
We need to spice it up a little bit.
No. So maybe I don't. But so our business is based on licensing, right? We see about 2,000 licensing opportunities per year from all over the world. So 70% of our ventures are based on IP license from universities, 30% from the large strategics. Within the university bucket, it's all over Europe. So we've done Oxford, we've done Charité, we've done all the Dutch and the German ones. Then there's also Mayo Clinic and Cedars-Sinai and all the guys. So, and my observation is that the deal terms for IP licenses from universities are pretty much globalized and standardized. So I don't see big differences there. I'm not sure that's what you were referring to, but it's a pretty standard deal. And there's usually royalties, down the line once you start doing sales. Yep. Some universities will ask for some equity. We don't really like that because they're not strategic partners in the long run. But it's become a pretty global world. There are conferences where all the TTOs gather and they share best practices, and it leads to a fairly uniform landscape, which is fantastic for us. I think you probably all heard the statistic that 95% of health tech never makes it to the patient, which is, I think, something we're all here to solve. So there's a lot of patients not being served well, or as well as they could be because of that. And also think about, I don't know how many trillion is the market cap of all health tech companies combined? That only represents 5% of the entire opportunity. So we have 95% of opportunity still out there. Not sure that's entirely right.
Licensing and commercializing are completely different approaches. Yes. Read is more planar. I think that commercialization is a little bit different, right, from country to country.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that globally universities now have the same structure of licensing, and you spoke about Western Europe and North America. I mean, less than 1/3 of the world population. This is the problem that we are facing right now in the global south. We are working with over 80 different universities, from NTU and NUS to Peking and all the way till universities in India and Brazil, and they do not have standardization. In fact, that is one of the major challenges that we face with innovations happening in these regions, which are meant for these regions too. So, I mean, the world is slightly different down there.
No, you're fully right. And I also, we have looked at IP from places outside of Northern Europe and North America. It's hard to find stuff that meets the clinical quality levels. But it's also a fact that these universities aren't solving the problems of the global south, which is not to the right degree, at least, I think. So I think it's a major problem. We have a few ventures that are targeted at the global south, and it also for us it's an enormous challenge because the investor base, for example, is completely different. There's serious money, but they're very different investors. The go-to-market is different, the channel is different. So we are unable to solve those challenges. Yeah.
This brings me up to a question I want to, and perhaps bias being I'm also located in the APAC region. There's an incredible growth of medtech activity, as you all know. Let's talk about diligence, right, in your experience. And maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Kapasi, what advice you might give. But as companies are looking for partnerships, commercialization, licensing, especially in the emerging countries, emerging markets of the world, what advice would you give in terms of the diligence that they should be doing? And how do you do that, right? I mean, the US is vastly different in diligence versus like India.
So first is that in today's day and age, you cannot ignore the global south because there is where the market lies. At the end of the day, you cannot ignore 3/4 of the world. So first is that either way, you have to figure out a way into that space. That is one. Second is when we are talking about diligence, yes, the structures are not as well defined as in the US market or in Western European markets. That being said, the structures are being formed. So one of the best ways I would suggest to go is now these governments are fairly open and open to suggestions. The kind of government ecosystems we thought about 10, 15 years ago, things have changed drastically since then. There is a very warm, very welcoming approach. So go through official government channels is what I would say when you are looking at diligence. There are structured, very open and extremely accepting solutions that are designed by government organizations specifically for the growth of industry in the region. So if you are able to access those and they are very easy to access, they are pretty much on their website, everything is listed. So if you are able to trust just that much, I think then it's an easy way forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great insights. Pieter, your thoughts as you sort of talk about advice on diligence?
Yeah, so I appreciate the advice, and I think we have a lot to learn on how to unlock those markets. And I know there's a lot of passion for this with innovators in across the world. But I also just want to acknowledge that we have a long way to go and that we're listening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Eliane, on this topic per se, what was your approach to diligence as you started working with partners?
Well, obviously we worked with a boutique firm that knew a lot about credible Chinese companies, and we did a real phased approach where we looked at a lot of companies and honestly, I think for us what was important, do they really know the market? Do they understand it? But also, do they understand a bit, what it takes to get this also into China, manufacturing-wise, clinical, regulatory-wise. So what is their competence? And so that was more or less first, and how much are they selling, obviously, already in the space. Then the second thing, what I have done is basically checked out, okay, if we want to sign up with this partner and this is a long-term collaboration, then I need to know how they're doing the deal flow, but also once you're into it, are they really living up to expectations? What is their way of collaborating? I mean, actually learn. And the way how I learned was talking to CEOs that did deals with the same company. I said, how is this company behaving? How do they work? What are really things that I need to be, what are the watch out? What are the benefits? What are the lessons learned to be smart enough as you start in negotiation, but also understanding what you can expect from a partner like this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I got, honestly, you get also an observer on the board or suddenly that's Chinese. You need to understand all of this and not be completely naive. So just talking to the field and co-CEOs.
Okay. And I think finding the expertise in these areas to help you do all those things is important, right? Yes. The one or two people in China, the one or two people in EMEA or South America that have the expertise, understand the government regulations and understand how to navigate these paths are going to be really important for people that are considering this, right?
Yeah, so for the US, that's probably the first place many of the European ventures want to go. It's no different. So people think, they over-assume their knowledge levels on the US market. But once you get there, it's actually quite different. So I'd always recommend to do exactly what you did, do your diligence, but also get some people on the team, hopefully also on the board, that know what they're talking about, that have done it. Yeah.
I think you were my perfect plant because I was going to ask Jeff that question about US, so that was like a perfect segue. But look, obviously, I mean, whether you're in Asia or in Europe, a lot of the medtech companies are talking about the FDA, regulatory-wise, reimbursement. What are you seeing in terms of diligence? I mean, in terms of your sort of the clients that you work with, how well prepared are they when they come to how to access the US market?
Well, I heard it 4 times in the previous discussion, which was start early. right? This previous discussion, so I'll say the same thing to this group, is to start early on because you need to really understand the market landscape that you're dealing with and how your product fits into that landscape, because I've been a part of companies who've done it right and done it wrong. When you do it wrong, it's very, very painful, very costly on that side of it. So very important to understand the landscape and get partners that can drive you through the whole entire process from commercialization to, or from concept to commercialization, how those partners can help you along the way.
Yeah, great. I'd like to twist a little bit into just, again, the cross-border perspective, but specifically, I've heard this in other conversations as well. There's a rise, if you look at the regulatory body, there's also a real rise in cybersecurity policies, patient privacy, all of that. What sort of advice or what sort of, what are you telling the companies that you work with in terms of, and I'm going to use a word I heard a lot today, pivoting, right? What advice do you give to companies in terms of how to change strategy when it comes to cross-border business development? Dr. Kapasi, since you had an interesting look on your face, would you like to comment?
No, I think, interestingly, a lot of geographies are talking about data security, data privacy in a very different way. All of them have a different approach to it. It's not the same. Personal data is not viewed in the same way across. And I believe it's not about pivoting, it's just about understanding and tailoring the solutions slightly better. So you don't really, in med technology, I believe, especially in this case when it comes to data security, a major pivot is not necessary as long as your basic structures are built on the right value systems of using right primary data that you require and going for right sources for the same. So I think that it's not, in my understanding, a challenge that requires a massive pivot.
Yeah.
So,
Pieter, your perspective from a portfolio lens?
Yeah, I think the answer is, as usual, is not black or white. I don't think you can assume that your model is globally scalable and that you see people stick to this is it and take it or leave it, and that's never going to work. The flip side of that is you don't want to compromise stuff like data, like privacy, security, or quality, etc. So I believe in giving teams, freedom within a box to pivot to the local market need, which can mean quite a lot of different things. But as an example, I always advise our ventures when they go to the US to appoint somebody locally and give them a certain amount of freedom to do what is right for the US market, because otherwise you're going to fail. I don't believe in building up a US business with people behind Zoom from the Netherlands. It's never going to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think we've sort of been edging towards commercialization, right? We've talked about it quite often, and obviously there's no cross-border activity without commercialization. Maybe, Eliane, we'll start with you. How did you sort of approach not just your funding, but now commercialization across the world? And then the second piece I'm really curious about is the people behind it. How did you approach the talent that would be associated with it?
Well, echoing what was said. You need to respect that others might know stuff better than you do. If you think about sitting on your island and think, okay, commercialization, I can do it from the chair, and I know all of this. This is not gonna work. Yeah. And also, even in China, you have to have the respect and the understanding to the other side that they really know what they're up against and they know their business, right? And when you hire people, we're now in a pivotal stage in the US, but already thinking a little bit ahead, you hire people with that type of expertise. You also need to trust that what they're doing is the right thing to do. Yeah. And that's how you set up a team. And I think, that goes for not just commercialization, it's for any type of activity that you do as you grow as a company. You need to, at a certain moment, expand, hire the right people that have done it before, that have the credibility, and at a certain moment in time, you will have to trust that what they're doing is the right thing.
Right. Yeah. Dr. Kapasi, your perspective, you see a lot of companies, coming to the Asia Pacific, Middle East. Are they always thinking of people, or are they thinking channel? Like, how are they approaching things?
I'll give you a short example for that. So we worked with Roche on this product called SugarView, right? It's a card that you can scan, of course, after you actually have a small micro brick and you scan the card from your phone, and that's a proprietary algo that gives you a serum RBS value, a quantifiable serum RBS value, which for the entire region is important because it's the diabetes center of the world right now, unfortunately. What we were able to do for some program like that is design large-scale screening solutions which were backed by non-for-profits, governments, and also then partnered with larger pharmaceutical companies, which were not just Roche, because that then became a conflict of interest situation if you are looking at not-for-profit engagements. So create a multi-stakeholder situation where we were able to not just give them access to the market, but also a larger impact value and access to data and people, which was a long-term engagement for them. So, and one more thing, in that space, we were able to not just look at India, but India and neighborhood as a market. So people don't always realize, but like FDA has a huge, has huge respect across the world in terms of regulation, especially the Middle Eastern market. Indian regulatory systems also have a lot of acceptance in the neighborhood markets, which are 7 other countries, which total to about 2.2 billion people. So, and access to that understanding is something that I believe through strategic partnerships work very well.
Nicely said. We're just about 3 minutes into almost wrapping up, so I'd like to ask one of my favorite questions, culture. So what are your thoughts on, and this is something we in the recruitment business see a lot, right? A founding company that is now trying to enter another market, and they've got their founding culture, and they're trying to figure out which culture they should be as they enter another market. I told you it was my favorite question.
Make sure you have a leader that understands that culture in that particular market.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, that's what I want to get into is your thoughts on that founding culture and the entry culture. Maybe, Jeff, you've led the way.
Well, I think that's it. You need to find people who have the expertise that understand that, because they will be disjointed from your area, whether you're in the U.S. or somewhere else in England, because that culture in China or that culture in South America is different. So hire somebody that really understands it, because it will be separated from your team, and that individual will continue to communicate the results and the success of that, but it is a little bit disjointed, so you need somebody who really understands that.
Yeah.
An expert in that area, for sure.
How often do you see that with companies outside the U.S. working with you as they're coming into the U.S.?
A lot.
The disjointed part?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, the understanding part, certainly, but I think people are really, they're educated now. They know that they need to bring in this expertise to help them through their journey and where they're going and how to navigate their pathway moving forward. And that's the biggest takeaway here, is find somebody that can help you get there, because you could take a really strong person and put them in the wrong market and they won't be successful in that area, right? I've seen that a lot, actually.
So I want to take a specific angle here. I think 40% of the world's health tech IP is generated in Europe, but only 10% of the world's health tech capital is deployed in Europe. So there's an enormous funding gap. We also see, I don't know, looking under the hood, that the European VC landscape is not in a happy place at the moment. In fact, businesses are scaling up, meaning the early tickets become less and less available, or they're dying. There's a lot of VCs that are in deep trouble or have already died. And we need to get more US money here. And it will partially solve this cultural problem, because if there's money here, they'll give you advice, they'll help you, they'll solve the cultural problem for you. And we need to, and we talked about this before, we need to team up as an industry to make this happen. Because if we don't solve that problem, how to get, because when a US investor looks at Europe, it's really scary.
Yeah,
27 different countries, everybody has their own culture and their own language and their own... So how can we create platforms together to make it easier for the US money to come into our ecosystem?
Anything to add, Eliane? Your thoughts?
No, not really. I mean, clearly we run a company with multi-international people, but then also, of course, working with the Chinese. I mean, it's always when you work with other people that you need to try to understand them, but also realize that you never will, right? So as said, right, make sure that you, if you really want something in a certain area, then you have to have somebody there that is locally. And it can be as simple. I mean, when we did the Chinese deal, we just hired a process engineer that spoke Chinese. Chinese specifically, because just to understand a bit the subtleties is important, and even bringing in the right Chinese food when they're coming in and not the Chinese food that we offer the Dutch. I mean, it's, for example, important to do. And I think those are the nuances that, well, it's important to understand the cultural differences.
Wonderful. Well, we're just about to wrap up. Maybe a last round robin. In order to make cross-border business development an art, just a quick, round robin thoughts from Dr. Kapasi, your side, all the way
We're
down
at
to
zeros. Do we have another hour? Or?
I'm holding everybody from cocktails, basically. So, your thoughts on how to make this more of an art?
I think it's about understanding. At the end of the day, it's about understanding the need of a particular region and acting accordingly. What you said about culture is true. Culture and sensitivity begins with need assessment. I think that was the first thing I mentioned earlier as well. So when you understand the need of everything, from the need of the region to the need of the market, to the need of the partners, to the need of the commercial market and commercial partners that you're going with, that is when you build that sensitivity into the ethos of your organization. That is the art that you have to look into.
Yeah, I think she's nailed it, but I think it's really understanding this is the colors of Benetton, right? Every country is different. How can you find the right expertise? How do you support that expertise? And how do you build that within your organization and the culture? I think is really, really important to simplify it.
Yeah. So nothing beats a balanced team. And team isn't just your own team, it's also your investors and your partners. And if you get that right, then it's easy.
Eliane?
Yeah, and you need a certain drive. I mean, nothing is ideal, and you always see, it's a rocky ride, always. So this certainly, if it's outside of your territory, I mean, this is not easy. So don't be naive, or hire the right expertise, be patient, and continue on your journey, right? Eventually you'll succeed, and listen well.
Well done. Thank you so much for being an amazing panel. Thank you, everyone, for hanging tight. I know it's been a long day, but you've definitely earned those cocktails, so appreciate your time. Thanks.